Hey guys, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you, and today we are going to be reviewing the RTX 4080. So the Nvidia RTX 4080. Now I do want to cover a little bit of history with this to give us a little bit of fat to chew on the bone, but I do want to start straight away with prices. So when Nvidia planned for these, we obviously had the 4090, the 4080 16GB, which we're reviewing today, and they did have plans for a 4080 12GB, which apparently is now going to get launched in January as the 4070 Ti. So originally there were going to be two 4080s. Now the history lesson. The 3080, when it launched, despite being in the midst of scalper hell, launched with a dollar price of £699. Now, the 4080, you'd think would be the direct comparison price-wise. This is actually going to launch at £1,199. Now, this does make me wonder, because the 3080 Ti launched at £1,049, meaning that the pricing between the two would then lead me to believe that the 4070 Ti or 4080 12GB, whichever you think, $699, I'm going to put a punt in straight away that that graphics card is going to launch at $849, maybe $899, meaning that we have kind of a comparison of steps. But with all of this mixed up naming and the branding all being kind of moved around and renamed and stuff, it does mean that we instantly start going, well, hang on a minute, the 3080 was $699, this is going to be $1199. Like, that's an awful lot of difference in price. Like, it's not quite twice as much, but there's a hell of a difference between $699 and $1199. $500, just like, what? And I think at a time where everyone is, worried about money, cost of living, everything's going up through the roof, I understand things are going to start costing a little bit more, but not £500 more. If it's got the same name but with a different number and it's just a different generational difference, genuinely you can't have a price difference that much. So if the naming thing is now the reason for it, then with all due respect, maybe everything should have been changed, because we're all going to compare the 3080 with the 4080. There is no two ways about it. They do want us to compare it to the 3090 and 3090 Ti, kind of specs and performance wise, probably because of the price comparison there. But I don't see the point in us comparing them price wise if they're going to perform relatively similarly, but you've just given it a different name. And it just doesn't sit well with me. It really doesn't. Genuinely, when I saw the price of this card, I'd already said in my head, $899. Top end. They can't charge more than £899 for it, because it's called an 80. And yet it's another $300 on top of that. And the thing is the Founders Edition, which will always be quicker than the reference cards, because the Founders isn't a reference. The vendors, their prices will start from $1199. And normally, if they are $1199, they're non-overclocked, very basic models. And also, they will not be available for long, because more often than not, you'll only get select batches of those. And then that's why there's always a difference between the very vanilla models from the vendors and then they have an overclock model, because the overclock model is actually the one that they make money on. More often than not, they're losing money on the normal ones, which is why they're never around for very long. You normally see them on launch days or when there's big offers and promotions going on later on. So we are already hearing about prices of the 4080 being over $1,500. So that's really close to 4090 kind of reference money. And we all go, well, that's 4090 money, buy a 4090. But then because of what I've just said about the vanilla models and the Founders Editions and stuff, you've then got to try and find one at that price. And it always makes it look like scalpers. But at the end of the day, it's just the way the market works, and it's always been that way. For argument's sake, Asus have now started selling direct because then they can almost meet the MSRP because they kind of take the retailers out of it, thus saving money because everyone's got to make money for listing, wages, posting and all of that sort of stuff. And then it means that they can make that kind of budget pricing, and you do actually annoyingly seem to get MSRP cards on there more often than anywhere else. But anyway, I digress with that because that's another thing that I'd really like to rant about, but you know, whatever. So the 4080 just I can understand why it's there because they thought they were going to have two 4080s and you were going to get the cheaper 4080, and like I said, I reckon the cheaper 4080 would have been the comparison to the old 3080, but quite rightly everyone went nuts about it, and then this has happened. So I've done my pricing thing, but I can now hear there are people literally climbing through their monitors shouting at me because I've not mentioned the red team. Now, the red team, in reality, played an absolute blinder because what they did is they knew the 4080 was coming. They knew the 4080 had obviously then been split and we weren't going to get a 4080-12 and everything like that. So they've announced their stuff, which is coming in early December. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to mention the launch day yet because there's NDAs on NDAs on NDAs as far as this stuff is concerned. But we do know the price, and we know that their top end card is coming in at £1,000. The thing is I'm not going to guess at performance. We haven't been given any hints, and at the end of the day, till I've put their card through this system in the same way that I do everything else, I don't really want to talk about possible performance comparisons. But we do need to remember that they have their top flight card coming in at £1,000. So if it comes anywhere close to this, then we have some legitimate reasons to, you know, make decisions. Now, I am going to talk to you about power draw, games, benchmarks, productivity, all of that sort of stuff with this review. And I do want to say that you can go to the Overclock 3D website. There's lots more results, lots more games, lots more stuff with ray tracing on, ray tracing off, DLSS, frame generation. We test a lot. I think it's 80 something results now I have to do for one of these because of all the frame gen things and all of that sort of stuff. It takes a long time. So if you fancy it, head over to the website. Please remember to like, subscribe, comment, play it to your dog, tell your nan, all of that sort of stuff. And please do remember, yes, I do talk a lot, but my angle is this is like us having a bit of a chat at the pub. I'm not here to sell you stuff. I'm not here to tell you what to buy, what not to buy. We're just here for a bit of a chinwag. And a chinwag is a chat. And then you can make your choice depending on what you want to do. So far, all we've worked out is I think that's too expensive. Plainly, purely based on the naming structure that they had before. And the 3080 back then actually looked quite an aggressively priced card. And now this one doesn't. We've got back to the point of many taxes again, whether it's Nvidia tax or whatever. Just remember that if you've got Nvidia tax, then you're going to get ROG tax, and then you're going to get value added tax. It's just bonkers, blows your head. So we'll go into the testing side of things rather than me having a rant. And the power draw kind of sits it around the 3070 Ti, 6800 XT. It wasn't as nuts as the 4090. And weirdly, though, even though it didn't draw the power of the 4090, it was about the same sort of temperature. But obviously with Nvidia, they are built to run as quickly as they possibly can do with the cooling that's available, and also then stay relatively quiet. And these coolers do work very well. And this is the point where I kind of do want to say aesthetically, other than the etching on the back of the card where it says 4090 and they've got a tiny little bit of etching on the and another point of the card, they are exactly the same to look at from the outside. So when it's in your rig, you know, unless you get a close look, you're not going to know whether you've got a 4090 or a 4080, much less if you've stood it up vertically. So power draw and temperatures are all very similar. Synthetic wise, there's a fairly decent generational step between them. You can see it's kind of very clear cut and the productivity side of things with Blender is as well. It gets a little muddier when you start talking about games though, because obviously some games work better than others. Now, a lot of people have been saying to me recently about the CPU that's in this. Obviously, all of the results that we've got here on the website, backwards testing as well, we are still using the 3950X. Now, I do personally want to switch, but at the time of the 4090 coming out, we were still waiting on CPUs to come out. At this point in time, my CPU is capping a lot of these even at 4K. But then some of you guys at home might not be upgrading into an entirely new system either. So there is still some validity with what's going on because not all of us have the money to go and spend £800 on an Intel i9 or the 7950X, although that's where this is probably going to be heading. We then have to do all the backwards testing. So for me to change this rig, it's 2 weeks worth of sat there benching graphics cards. So that's why I've been kind of pausing for things to settle a little bit. Maybe we'll do it over like the Christmas break or something. But at the moment, some of them you'll see that it looks like the 1440p's and the 4K's are all the same, and that's when the CPU comes into it and it is the limiting factor. But I actually think that does add an extra level into the review so that you can see, well, hang on a minute. So, you know, that's being capped at that. Yeah, okay, the performance might be better with a different CPU, but we've still not got a slouch. It's not like we're running an i5 or something that's a million generations old. Forza Horizon, you do get a nice swoop in the graph with performance as you go up through the ranges from like the 4080 and the 4090, and it's also very easy to run at 4K with frames well above 60 frames per second, and that is with, we always turn all of the eye candy on, so that is something that you can kind of take away from this. Is it's very, very easy. To be honest with you, with something like this in the 4090 and that game, you could run triple screens and 3 1440s and it would be glorious. F1 2022. Now with this, as you can see, you're getting up to the top end, towards the top end of the graph, and you do get a huge step at the end. And if you have a look at those, that's both with the frame gen. So that's obviously something that you're only going to be getting with the 4000 series stuff officially, because there are people trying to unlock that sort of stuff for the 3000 series. But officially, you can see where the big generational leap comes, and that's obviously with the DLSS and then the frame gen turned on. That's kind of where they're trying to pitch these, is where it is moving forward. Now, I would genuinely like to test the 3000 series if we could get DLSS3 working properly with it to see what the numbers were kind of like. But I think Nvidia are pretty much pinning the huge step forward on DLSS and frame generation. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because when DLSS was first announced, we kind of all said if they get behind this properly, and the developers do as well, then it could be an amazing thing. And in reality, DLSS does make a nice amount of difference. You can pretty much say that at 4K you're going to be getting the performance that you would have been at 1440. It's kind of the rule of thumb with how it roughly works. But with the frame generation as well, that's still going to take a little bit of work, because some of the picture quality has been getting lost in some games, but it is still very early days. And I think once they really start cranking on those servers back at Nvidia AI HQ, I do think that they will get that refined. But anyway, Cyberpunk, absolute, it's a gobbler, this one. It does stress things an awful lot. And the beautiful thing about Cyberpunk is we can test it with ray tracing off, and then we can turn it on, and you can see the next graph with DLSS, and also then the frame generation again, and you can see the frame generation. It does take a massive leap at the end. So, my thoughts on the 4080. It's clearly a good graphics card. I do think though that the naming and the pricing has really kind of hit them. That's been turned on for a little while, but you know, the naming and the pricing has kind of hit them really at the wrong time, and the plan probably should have been thought out a little bit better from the start. Maybe the 4080 was meant to have been the 4080 Ti, and the 4080 12GB was meant to have been the 4080, because the pricing would suggest that. But the naming structure now really hasn't helped them, and I think it's kind of a bit late. If the 4090 was meant to be the 4080 Ti, then again, do you know what I mean? I don't know, but this is very expensive. There were a lot of there was a driver launch that increased the performance of the 3000 series as well, which has closed the gap a little bit. Sadly, I didn't get a chance to completely retest these. We've just been too busy with motherboards and stuff, but that will be getting readdressed. And I do think, I don't normally tell people to sit and wait. I do think, though, that with the next generation of stuff from the Red team, I don't think they're probably going to catch up with ray tracing, and I do think that the DLS side of things and frame generation is still, that gap is still going to be as large. But the pricing side of things at the moment, and the unfortunate nature of the way that the naming's gone, it is getting a little bit uncomfortable, to the point where I watch and look at all the comments and see everyone fighting and people saying that they are taking the mickey a little bit too much. And if I'm completely honest, I'm starting to get to the point where I'm getting disappointed. The 3080 pricing, with the performance that it brought back then, was actually really nice and like delivered really well. And I think if the 4080 had come in at that price, it would have been an absolute slam dunk. I know everyone is going to rush out and buy them anyway, because people just do, and they just want nice stuff. But I think if you are sat there and you're conscious and wary about where to spend your money, I never normally say this, but I would sit and wait for a few weeks. Wait until the Red team have their 7000 series cards out. See what the reviewers say, see what other reviewers say. Wait and see what I say. But at this present moment in time, it makes me quite uncomfortable to wholeheartedly kind of push and say that something's amazing when I genuinely do feel, as I've said, because of the naming and the way everything's gone, to compare the 4080 to the 3080 and there being such a broad price difference, it just leaves a really bad taste in my mouth. But like I said, I do think that this probably should have been the 4080 Ti, and it hasn't panned out the way that they wanted. But do I think you should go and buy a 4080? I think that's a decision you have to make. I've given you a lot of information, but if you're really going to push me off the fence so I've not got splinters on my bum, I'd say give it a couple of weeks to a month. Wait for the dust to settle. Don't rush out and buy anything just yet. See what might come in the next few weeks and then make your decision. In their kind of like defense, if you're playing games with DLSS, then the performance is going to be nuts anyway. But it really is something. This is a time where not to rush out and buy something. Look at the games that you want to play. Look at the games that have got the support that you want, and then wait and see what happens in a few weeks' time. Because now, for me, is not the time to be going and spending $1,200 on this. And we've seen so far prices over $1,500 on the others. It may even come down to it that I just tell you to go out and buy a cheap 4090. But right now, we should just wait. And I really hate saying it. But anyway, bit of a weird one at the end. Hope you got to the end. If you did, we are having cookie dough ice cream. The regulars will know to comment underneath. Thank you for tuning into the end. This has been the tiniest one with another video for you. Out. Ding! Love you, sis. And the camera battery is on 1 minute.